So now with VS Code being set up and this first Flutter project being created and opened in VS Code, attached to this lecture, you find a main.dart file. And you should take that file and go to that lib folder in that Flutter project which you created and which you opened in VS Code and replace the main.dart file you find in there with the one you find attached, simply to make sure that we all have the same starting state. Now, at the beginning of the next course section, I will walk you through these folders and files that were created here. And of course, in the next course section, you're also going to learn how to write Flutter and therefore also Dart code from the ground up. This main.dart file here, of course, already has some code in it, so that soon we can see something on the screen. At the moment, of course, all this code won't tell you much though. That's no problem though, you're going to learn all about this code and much more throughout this course. So now with that main.dart file being replaced, we can use this starting code, this demo code, which I provided to you here, to see a first app running on an emulator. And for that, you should make sure that you have a virtual device, an Android emulator or an iOS simulator up and running. And if that's not the case, a simple way of running such an emulator is to use VS Code and then there under View, choose the command palette or use the shortcut which you see here, which will open this command window here where you can type commands and execute them from inside VS Code. And for example, if you type Flutter here, you'll see some Flutter related commands. You could, for example, also create a new Flutter project here with this tool if you wanted to. But if you then add a bit more context here, and you, for example, also start typing emulator, you should see this launch emulator option here. And if you choose that, a new window should open up that allows you to pick an emulator. And here I'll use that Android emulator, which I created before. And if you confirm this here, this emulator will be started for you. And that's simply a bit easier and more convenient than doing that through Android Studio. And you could, of course, also start an iOS simulator from in there. In this course, I will mostly use the Android emulator though, since that runs on all systems, whereas an iOS simulator can only be started on macOS. And since not all students have macOS, I will stick to Android for most examples. Now, with such a virtual device up and running, we can run our Flutter app on it. It's a simple app, but still, this code, which I provided to you, creates an entire Flutter app that can be executed on a mobile device. Now, to run this app on a mobile device, you got a couple of options. First of all, I recommend that you go to View, and then there under Appearance, you make sure that you show the status bar, which is this bar at the bottom. There you should see the device which will currently be used for running your Flutter app here. And if you click on this device, you could also change it and, for example, test it as a macOS or Windows app or anything like this. This course here is about building mobile apps with Flutter though, and therefore here I will always use such an Android emulator or the iOS equivalent. But here you can make sure that you will run the app on the correct device. And once you did make sure that the correct device was picked, you can run this app here by going to the main.dart file. And there you should see a couple of options above this main thing here. And here, for example, you also have a run option. And if you press this option here, the app would be built for the platform you chose here in the status bar. And it would be executed on that device which you selected in the status bar. Now, alternatively, you can also use the terminal, which you can also open through VS Code, and then there choose New Terminal, and there run Flutter Run. This would also run this app here on the device which is currently selected in the status bar. Now, the approach I will use in most cases is a different one though. In VS Code, with a Dart file selected, the main.dart file or later also another Dart file, you can go to the menu bar and there under Run, you find the Start Debugging and Run Without Debugging options. Now, I'll explain what the difference is later in the course. In most cases in this course, I'll use this run without debugging option, which will also build and run this Flutter app for the device that is selected in the status bar. So here, if you then press run without debugging, you will see that a new process starts where this app is being prepared for being executed on that target device. This window here also opens up, this debug console, in which you could see error messages if something goes wrong. You can also close this window though, the build process will still continue. And this little menu here, this little item here, which also can be moved around, also opened up in the editor. This can be used to control the running app. You can, for example, stop it by pressing this stop button here. You can restart it to make sure that all the changes you might have made in code are picked up by using this button. In addition, this little window here at the bottom might have opened up, allowing you to start the Flutter DevTools, which I won't do here though, but about which you will learn later in the course. And now with that app up and running, if you do go back to your emulator, you should see an app that looks something like this running on that virtual device. Of course, a very simple, not too useful app, but a first Flutter app running on this virtual mobile device. And everything you see here on the screen is in the end defined in this main.dart file and is controlled by that main.dart file. Again, you will of course learn about all that code in that file throughout the course. This lecture here is only there to give you a first glimpse at this code you will learn about throughout this course, and of course to also show you how such a Flutter app can be run on such a virtual device. Now with that app up and running, let's also make our first little code change to see how that could be done and how those changes would be reflected on that virtual device. For that, back here in the main.dart file, if you scroll down, you should at some point find these text things here. These are so-called text widgets, but again, you will learn more about widgets and how to build user interfaces with code in Flutter throughout this course. Now in this text widget here, in this first one, you find this text here, Flutter the Complete Guide. And let's say we want to change this code and we want to rename this to Flutter the Complete Guide Course. We can simply make that change, and if you then save that code, and at the moment it's unsaved, as you can tell in VS Code by this dot here that's showing up next to the file name in this tab. But once you save that change, for example by pressing Ctrl S or Command S on macOS, you will see that we had these little windows open up at the bottom here, which in the end tell us that the Flutter extension that we installed here in VS Code noticed those changes and automatically updated the app running on the virtual device. So without us doing anything, you see that indeed there, the UI was updated and this change can be seen there. Now sometimes it happens that changes you make are not picked up, and in that case you can press this flash icon here to force Flutter to take another look at your code and apply these changes, or to use this restart icon and basically restart the app, which will always ensure that all your saved changes are reflected there. And these features simply exist to make the overall Flutter app development process as convenient as possible, since you don't have to restart the entire emulator or wait for the app to be rebuilt every time you make a tiny change. Instead, as you saw, when you make a change, it's typically reflected in the running app instantly, which of course is great and allows you to develop in a very fast pace.